Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on strengthening the fight against impunity. I know that we have the toughest slot because we have the after-lunch slot, and we also have to compete with the amazing view of the lake. So, but I promise you, with these panelists, I think we'll probably manage to keep your attention. I'm extremely honored that all of you have chosen to come to Bled for this panel, and I really want to also compliment the organizers on once again putting impunity on the agenda of the Bled Strategic Forum, because it's something that Slovenia has consistently done, and it shows the incredible commitment that Slovenia has to the subject. I wanted to start by just briefly pointing out, for those who don't know them, who the panelists are, and we have actually agreed that we're not going to have opening statements, but we will go straight into questions and discussion. After about an hour with the panel, there's still half an hour left in which we hope that we can engage with you, that you have questions, that you have comments. So please start thinking about them, because it shouldn't be only a one-way street. So our panelists, I'm going to start on the extreme left, not politically speaking, Mr. I think Andras Vamos-Goldman, who is the Director of Justice Rapid Response, and you'll tell us a little bit more about it because I'm not sure everyone knows the organization. Ambassador Christian Venneweser, who is the Liechtenstein permanent representative to the United Nations, and we used to work together when he was still president of the Assembly of States Parties of the ICC. Of course, to my left is the new president of the International Criminal Court, Silvia Fernandez. To my right, for the Slovenians, you already know him, he's the Justice Minister of Slovenia, Mr. Klemenčič. Next to him, Mr. Dieng, who is the UN advisor on genocide and prevention of genocide, obviously. And at my far right, Mr. Abbey Williams, who's the director of the Hague Institute for Global Justice, now living in my former hometown. So welcome to you all, and I wanted to start with you, Madam President. And I think one of the things that the organizers have asked, said, there's so many challenges facing the International Criminal Court and the global fight against impunity. We seem to be bombarded with bad news all the time. So it would be nice if in this panel we can also start thinking about some of the good news, but also about how we can find solutions rather than again listing the problems. And I've always found that merely the existence of the ICC is an incredible achievement through partnerships, which of course is the theme of the forum, because we could have never gotten the ICC to even come into existence. I know you were there at the founding as you were, Anders, actually as you were as well. So we have some of the people at the very beginning, the birth of this fragile child who has now matured into a fully fledged court. And given your having seen it from the inception to where it is now, I would be really grateful if you could outline a little bit what you think are the main challenges and solutions for the future, but also how far we've actually come.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. And I'm enjoying the view too, so that is great to be here with you discussing these issues. Actually, you mentioned the inception on the creation of this court. Sorry, do I have 7 minutes or 7 hours?
7 minutes. Okay. We have to be very, very strict.
I will be very.
But I know you can do it in 7 minutes.
Yes, I can. Well, but talking back to the inception, and many here have been involved in the negotiations of the treaty, I think one of the problems that we already had at the time, we continue to have today, and you talk about good news, bad news, I think there is a problem of mismatch of expectations and what the court can realistically achieve. And so if we want to understand the court and help the court, we have to start by adjusting this mismatch. And first of all, we need to manage expectations, and that requires more information on what is really the court about and international criminal justice about, what it can do and what it has done. And actually this requires this information not only for the international community as a whole, but in particular to information for victims. Managed expectation of victims. The court has a very ambitious program of victims' reparations that we are going to be implementing for the first year this year. And it is extremely important that everybody understand how far we can go, but also talking about what we need to make sure that we have enough support from the international community to the system of reparations of victims, including to the trust fund for victims. The second way to help in this mismatch of expectations is to increase cooperation from the outside world in order to increase the effectiveness of the court. The court needs cooperation. We have said that 20 times or more, and of course we need concrete assistance for the activities of the court. That means with the investigations, with the prosecutions. We need cooperation for arrest, cooperation for gathering information, cooperation to protect witnesses, cooperation to enforce sentences. We need cooperation also to help. We need, in addition to technical and judicial assistance, we need political support for the court wherever it is investigating and whatever the situation is about. International criminal justice cannot be about pick and choose. The court needs to work in a non-discriminatory, non-biased way, and it needs to be supported by states and international community as a whole for each situation. And we need also this political support to promote the court and promote universal participation in the court. This is very important to increase the strength of the court, but also to avoid this perception of bias in the selection of situations and cases. Many times we have asked, what are you doing here? What are you not here? What about Syria? What about Ukraine? What about these several situations of concerns for international community? And the answer is, well, we are a treaty body, and we don't have yet universal participation, so we have to act within the limits of that of the treaty. And the only way that we can go beyond is when there is a referral from the Security Council, and something that I'm sure we'll come back to this during this debate. And third and last, we need to improve, because that is also a way of adjusting expectations and output. We have to improve the output of the court. And this is basically my top priority as new president of this court, is to improve the efficiency of the court proceedings. Of course, the court is growing. It has only 12 years old as an institution. It's extremely young, but already we can take stock of what has been done, and we can recognize that a lot of things could be done better. And we are, at this point in time, revising the proceedings, even identifying probable amendments for the legal framework, and also working in reforming the structure of the court to improve its governance. So with these three, I think we might manage to somehow adjust expectations and delivery of the court, which has a big strength, which is a unique, ambitious mandate. It is the first court that can address issues of accountability in principle in any place in the world. It has already proved to be an incentive for states to adopt legislation and encouraging local investigations and domestic prosecutions, but of course has many challenges, as you said, and that needs a lot of support and commitment from the international community. So I will stop here so we can expand.
Your timing is impeccable. It's always good when the first one leads by example. So we turn to you, Mr. Minister. I first want you, because I know you were also there at the inception as a very young lawyer. How have you seen it develop? Because you haven't been that closely involved in the last years since the inception, and now all at once as Justice Minister, you're back, among the decision makers who are going to have to give exactly that cooperation and support that the President was talking about. And could you press the button on the microphone?
Oh, right.
Because it's also being broadcast on YouTube, on the internet.
Okay. the button is pressed, everybody complimented the view. I won't, because I'm used to it. I mean, that's, you know, a privilege of living in this country. Indeed, as a junior lawyer, a Slovenian delegate to the PrepComs, to the Rome Statute, Rules of Procedure and Evidence, I was present there. Then I kind of went into other waters related to anti-corruption, etc., and lost that a little bit. However, also, because of this panel and the development in recent years with the atrocities, etc., made me think, in all honesty, I mean, very personal view. I remember those times where in the late 90s, basically the war, the legal community, even the media, the NGO community, the international community was bubbling positively with ideas about how far the international criminal law can go. You know, the ICC, the Rome Statute, the ICTY, the ICTR were the headlines. Brahimi report, things like that were the headlines. Today, regretfully, mostly the atrocities are the headlines, and less the tools to address that. Yes, partly, of course, the geopolitical reasons, blah, 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 and also what the president of the court said, the expectations were so high that it was impossible to meet them. So, in that respect, it is kind of, I would like to see a bit of a revival of what was happening in the 90s and then early, in the early years in 2000. We need to speak more. I know this sounds very superficial, but it's important to repeat it every time and every now and then also on meetings like that, because one thing is, of course, to do more in the prevention area. You know, there are some good work has been done in the early warning mechanisms, things, child soldiers, things like that. Second, where I think that we missed an opportunity and we should revisit that, is strengthening, I mean, models and ideas about how to strengthen the rule of law in post-conflict situations. Let's face it, I think that the UN, or the UN in particular, even in executive mandates such as East Timor and Kosovo, were not necessarily overly successful in strengthening the rule of law and creating an environment there. And that was, if I may recall, because it is forgotten so often, that is something that the Brahimi report, which many of you, I think, still remember, highlighted as a core issue, the questions of applicable law, the questions of procedures and criminal justice in post-conflict situations. Second, I mean, and the ICC as a last resort. Now, we need to embrace the reality that the ICC, in some way, in my belief, has been actually used and abused, that basically we now have ICC so we can do less in our countries, because it's their responsibility. That's why I would like to hear, and with that I will conclude for the moment, is Slovenia has, together with Belgium, Netherlands, and Argentina, launched an initiative for the multilateral treaty for mutual legal assistance and extradition for domestic prosecution in the most serious international crimes. It has gained some momentum, but it needs more support. And we believe it is extremely important because it complements, we all know that we need to prosecute those crimes domestically or international also, and see the ICC as the last resort. And we all know that political will is hard to gather, and if political will has an excuse, the lack of political will has a legal excuse that of course we would like to do it, but we don't have the legal grounds, that's then even easier. And this treaty builds on the idea that of course the Anti-Genocide Convention, the Geneva Conventions, they are the first generation treaties. They have weak or outdated provisions on mutual legal assistance and extradition. They're not like UNCAC or Palermo Convention, which are much more developed in this area. So this would be something that could gather more support, even from, if we embrace the reality of countries that, for one or the other reason, at this moment are not prepared to sign up to the ICC. So lastly, I think basically our challenge is to a large extent to get back in the headlines the solutions that were discussed. Some failed, some were implemented in the late 90s, basically to revive the process, discussion again. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much for that. And I think this is probably something that most people would love to do. And then I hope we can discuss a little bit how we can actually go about that, because it makes sense for the news. Sadly, good news is not always news. So for the bad news to make the headlines. And I wanted to turn to you, Mr. Dieng, because of course, sadly, a lot of the bad news is coming out of Africa these days. I know you're at the UN, but because of your background also with the Rwanda Tribunal and being from Senegal, I wanted to get your perspective on how you see the relationship between Africa or the African Union and the ICC developing. There have been some, of course, the big headlines were, Omar al-Bashir gets red carpet treatment in South Africa, but then he has to be chased out. Is that good news? Is that bad news? If indeed the African Union would set up an African criminal court, is that a threat to the ICC, or is that just complementary by any other means?
But thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First of all, let me say that most of the time you do receive only the bad news from Africa, because the press, unfortunately, focuses more on the trains which never arrive on time rather than those which arrive on time. Because these days there are very much good news coming from Africa, but which are unknown when we talk about criminal justice. Right now we have the case of Hissène Habré, the former president of Chad, which is going on in my hometown, Dakar. And this is a result, first, of Senegal having domesticated universal jurisdiction, which allows it, therefore, to handle such cases. And second, the African Union agreeing that the case be referred to Senegal and being dealt there. Why? Because when the case was brought to Senegal, there were reluctance from the then leader of that country to really have this case proceeding. And then Belgium, because there was a case also started in Belgium, an investigative judge started the work, and the then president said, well, we don't want this case to proceed in Belgium, we want it to be tried in Africa. And I think there is a merit, because if there is something which is, to my view, important, that is the closeness of justice. The closer justice is to the crime scene, the better it is for the victims and the affected communities to participate in the process and to see justice being done. And I think that is extremely important. That's why I'm not at all afraid seeing African Union setting a criminal division within the African Court of Human Rights and Justice. I'm not afraid of that. I think it is, in fact, a positive element. Because we should not forget one thing. ICC has a key principle, which is complementarity. So in other words, ICC will be very fortunate if tomorrow member states around this world have genuine tribunals, independent and courageous judges to handle cases, be it at the local, national, regional level. So therefore, I don't see this criminal division being a threat. And more so, I should add that as a matter of innovation, among the crimes which the criminal division will be, which will be justiciable before that court, you have the crime of corruption, you have the crime of piracy, you have the crime of terrorism, etc. So this is important. Where I have problem with this African Union decision is Article 46A. This is a provision which grants, let's say, temporary immunity to sitting head of state, to senior government officials who are still in function. That I have a problem. Why? Because it's a serious violation of international law. It's a violate the Nuremberg principle. You can be a head of state, you can be a prime minister, whatever. So that's where I have a problem. And second, I'm not sure even that the day this criminal division will start operating, that those judges sitting will grant impunity to those leaders. That is one thing. And the second thing is we have also to realize that although this protocol has been adopted, we have to wait its formal ratification through our various African parliaments before it enters into force. And the other aspect I would emphasize is that sometimes, of course, perception is worse than reality. And there is a perception, of course, among Africans that the ICC is selective, that only Africans have been brought before the tribunal at The Hague. I mean, that is true, but what people have to realize, to remember, is that most of those cases ICC is dealing today were brought to the ICC by the very same African leaders, you know, and who, in those cases, of course, these people were either rebels who they were fighting, etc. Except, of course, you have two cases. One is Darfur, and the other one is Kenya. And in the case of Kenya, you all remember that both the camp of President Uhuru and Vice President Ruto were arguing, should the case be handled here in Nairobi or sent to The Hague? There was a huge debate, even at the parliament. And at the end, decision was, well, we prefer the case to proceed at The Hague. Later on, both of them were elected as president and vice president. So I don't see a problem there. And I'm glad that President Uhuru cooperated with the tribunal. Until the end, the court decided that the case will stop there for the time being. Now, regarding the case of Bashir, Bashir went to South Africa. And to my view, I see it really as a positive development. Because when a head of state is finally obliged to hide and get out of that country because he was afraid that he will be arrested. So it was a total secret until he left the country. And the case also went before the South African court. What does it mean? That means we have really to make every effort to strengthen the rule of law everywhere. Bashir will not be able to travel everywhere. I'm not sure that he will take the risk again to travel to South Africa. And I think that is a positive lesson. And also it is a positive lesson because this experience will inspire also certainly other legal activists throughout the continent to make the same attempt. So that's why, Madam, I said this is extremely positive, and we have to make every effort now to get really the African Union and the ICC to cooperate. And this should be done through a very, I would say, vivid dialogue between the two. I think, and there is a room for that dialogue. And I see it possible, I think it is possible to make sure that the doors which have been slammed shut be reopened. And this should be, I think, an urgent requirement. We should all make effort, and that's where partnership will definitely be important into this struggle we are doing.
Right. Thank you very much, and also for some of the other kind of global issues that you've raised here. And that brings me, of course, to the UN. The other part of the UN, one of the member states, Ambassador Venewezer is steeped in everything that is the UN. And I think one of the main allegations, of course, you mentioned already Syria, Why does Sudan get referred and Syria not get referred? Why Ukraine not? So this allegation of selective justice, to which I think the simple answer is, well, because we know in the Security Council that certain countries would block the referral. But you're working on solutions to try to address that. Could you tell us a bit more about it, please?
Thank you. Thanks, Luzavis. Well, I think I want to pick up where the president, in a way, has left off. She has talked about a mismatch of expectations, which I largely agree with, which I think is also part of what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to do every day, namely to make people understand what this court is and what this court is not. This is not a court that will be able to sit in judgment over every atrocity crime committed in the world. It is the center of a system that is meant to fight impunity and that can be incredibly effective. But the main task is still with us as nation states and with our national judiciaries. So the existence of the ICC and becoming part of the ICC also creates a very strong incentive for states to do their job and to investigate and to prosecute. And I agree that, I have no issue with, institutions that deal with the same crimes if it's done so effectively. You have to wonder perhaps why states that have joined the ICC choose to set up yet another institution. But everything that supports the fight against impunity is a good thing. Maybe there are cases where we have to say, this is not something that should be tried before the ICC. It can be tried in a country with international assistance, and that is perfectly, within the remit of the Rome Statute system. But the mismatch that I wanted to talk about is the one of the potential of the system and of the political engagement that we currently have. That is, for me, as a diplomat at the UN, the biggest challenge, because we do have a system now in place that allows the international community to fight impunity for atrocity crimes anywhere in the world. But it is us as governments, it is us as states that have to show the commitment in order to do this. It's not the court. The court cannot do it. The court does not have jurisdiction in 70 countries in the world today. So we have, I think today, on the one hand, we have this truly big achievement, which is the ICC. There's no question about it. None of us, there's a lot of veterans in this room and in fact on this panel. None of us would have thought 10, 15 years ago that we would be today where we are. And I think it's important to say that. On the other hand, how do you measure the success in the fight against impunity? And you measure it by, crimes committed, by the number of victims, by people held accountable. And if you measure it that way, of course we're not doing great. Of course we're sitting here talking about impunity while people are streaming into Europe, fleeing crimes in Syria that have been committed for 4 years due to failure of diplomacy. And of course we're sitting here, having read the reports on the situation in North Korea, the situation in Eritrea, and so on. So of course, the impunity gap is still there. But the problem is what we states have so far, sometimes actively refused to do. And that's one thing that we're trying to change at the UN, and that brings me back to your very concrete question. As we know, in some situations, and in fact in all of the situations I have just mentioned, in Syria, in Eritrea, in North Korea, the only way to get the ICC involved is if the Security Council says, this is a situation that should be investigated by the International Criminal Court. Because these are states that have, obviously for good reason, for good cynical reasons, chosen not to join their own statute system. So it's only the Security Council of the United Nations that can create jurisdiction for the ICC in these cases. And what we have seen in the past, in particular in the case of Syria, is the very blunt political calculation to say we're in fact willing to use our veto to make sure that the crimes in Syria are not investigated by the ICC, and that is something that we believe should be changed. And this is why we have drafted, together with over 30 other states, including Slovenia, a code of conduct on how states commit to conduct themselves when they serve on the Security Council. It's a very simple political commitment. It's not something that, it's not a legal text. It is a political commitment that governments can make publicly and openly and say, if I serve on the Security Council, I pledge to not be in the way of action by the Council to fight atrocity crimes. And of course, referring such crimes to the ICC is one way of fighting that. And that is an initiative that we are currently lobbying for. We're hoping that as many states as possible will join it. We do, of course, hope that as many as possible of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council join it, because their no vote on such a proposed decision has, of course, blocking effect. But in fact, we do believe that it's very important to get that commitment from every state. So everybody who comes to us now and says, please vote for me because we want to serve on the Security Council for the next 2 years, we will ask, well, are you willing to make this commitment? Because for us, that is important. We do not want to have states on the Security Council that conduct themselves in such a way that is not only against, all core principles of human rights, but in fact also undermines peace and security. We think it's a very important initiative. We certainly hope that we will get a significant number of governments to subscribe to it, and we hope that it will be one contribution to get, to reduce that mismatch between the potential that the Rome Statute system has and the current level of political engagement that we are seeing.
Right. Thank you very much, Ambassador. That when you mentioned the cynical reasons for not joining the ICC, and brought me back to your mention of Ukraine, and then I really wonder that if you have all kinds of Russian activities on your territory, what on earth could be preventing you from ratifying the Rome Statute? Because it would be the perfect situation to say, if you want these crimes to be prosecuted and you know it's not going to happen, to in a way protect yourself against, especially when you don't have control over the territory yourself. So I don't know if there's any Ukrainians in the room. We can have a discussion about that. But my strong recommendation is do it while you can. So I remember when after the Muslim Brotherhood was ousted in Egypt, a delegation from the Freedom and Justice Party came to the ICC to say, actually, we now do want to ratify the Rome Statute. Well, sorry, but you're not in power anymore, and it doesn't look like President Sisi is going to be doing that. So the window of opportunity sometimes can be quite small. The Tunisians did it, they got it right. Egypt missed the opportunity. And I think this is one of the things we should remember, that these chances in certain countries don't always come. And even if you're not in a Ukrainian situation, other countries are. And the more we can encourage to join, the safer the world will be. Anyways, I want to turn now to Andres Vamos Goldman. First, if you can tell us a little bit about Justice Rapid Response, because I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with the work that you do, and then move towards what you think would be the major improvements required now to improve the fight against impunity.
Thanks, Luis. If you permit me, I'm going to do it exactly the opposite way.
Perfect.
Because there's a very useful and interesting segue into what previous speakers have been saying. So our topic is very interesting today because we've got both strengthening the fight against impunity, and we're talking about partnerships and cooperation. And just before the session got underway, I was speaking to a couple of people in the audience, and we were wondering, well, what does it actually mean to strengthen the fight against impunity? Impunity for what? And it reminds me of the fact that this is a phrase that we've been using at least for the last 22 years, if not longer. And we've been using it very liberally. We're always trying to end impunity for the worst crimes known to humanity. And I think it's important for us to understand what it really means to be able to do that. Very simply put, in my opinion, it means that whenever there is accountability, and since we're talking about core international crimes, let's stick with that definition. Whenever there is accountability for core international crimes, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, mass atrocity crimes, that accountability has to be credible in order for us to be able to make any inroads against the sense of impunity for those who are carrying out those crimes. And how do you make that accountability credible? And what does that mean? Well, credible accountability is when the people believe that actually there is accountability. When there's a sense of justice to the victims and the survivors of these conflict-related crimes, when there is a sense of deterrence that comes out of the process, those who would be perpetrators in the future actually pause and think about the fact that if they proceed down a certain road, they will be effectively investigated and prosecuted. So that those tools, justice and deterrence, can be used to try to end the many, many cycles of violence that we have around the world today. So to me, that's what more effectively fighting impunity is all about. And from my perspective and our perspective, and I will get to what Justice Rapid Response does, one of the ways that we can strengthen that fight is to make sure that the foundation on which that accountability is built is strengthened. And that foundation is the investigation of whatever happened. And that investigation has to be appropriate. And by appropriate, I mean it has to be done by people who have the expertise and the experience, who are trained specifically to work under international criminal justice rules, who have a diversity, who have the cultural, legal, linguistic compatibility with the place and the people where the investigation is taking place, who are able to be deployed quickly and to be able to be on the scene whenever they are needed, and whenever and wherever they can investigate. So that anywhere in the world we have a possibility to investigate these crimes, we can actually make sure that the right people are there in the right place at the right time. Because, as previous speakers said, international criminal justice is not yet universal. We can't be everywhere. There are political and security reasons why we're not in certain countries. So it's vitally important that when we can be somewhere, that investigation, that accountability be credible, because it is in those places where we can make the inroads today. So the expertise that we need to do that investigation exists throughout the international system, and this is where we come into cooperation and partnership. And it exists in states, it exists in international courts and institutions, in civil society and in the private sector. The question is, how do we make sure that we bring it out and bring it to the service of the international community, when all of these sectors of the international community still exist in silos? States work in a certain way, international institutions another way, civil society another way, and yes, there are links and interactions between them, but those links and interactions are very much regulated and very much slated in decades-old practices. So we're going to have to innovate a little bit, and that's what we have done, to come up with a public-private partnership that allows us to bridge these silos, to make sure that we're able to bring together states, international institutions, civil society, the private sector, both to bring out the experts and then make them available to the international community. That's what Justice Rapid Response has done. We've been around for almost 6 years. We have 80 plus countries and more than 20 institutions and organizations that participate in our work. We make that participation very easy in order so that we can have as broad a membership as possible. We have developed a roster of more than 550 experts from almost 100 countries because we have recruited them by asking states and institutions to nominate them to our training courses, to make sure that the quality of the expertise and the experience and the training is there, so that we can certify them, and when we make them available to those in the international community that have jurisdiction, that we know that we're providing the right person at the right time to go to the right place. I'm very proud, actually, to say that we have been able to create a roster that is more than 40% from the Global South and is more than 53% women. And in a sector like criminal justice, which is male-dominated in most parts of the world, 53% is a very good statistic. And we have been used. We provide expertise to the International Criminal Court, parts of the UN system. We have partnerships with regional organizations, and we provide expertise to countries on a complementarity basis that want to investigate but need some expertise, and we provide those experts to them to help and mentor local counterparts, not to do the work for them, but to help them carry out the work as close to international standards as possible. So this is a new way. These are new partnerships. These are new ways in which to bridge the silos and bring together the expertise from the international community to do one fundamental part of what it takes to make sure that the fight against impunity can be improved.
Right. Thank you very much. And then for the final member of the panel, Dr. Williams, who's the director of the Hague Institute for Global Justice. I think we know that in partnerships, the key element besides the states, the organizations, is of course also civil society. And I think your institute has done an amazing job in the few years since its inception to bring together all the different players, stakeholders, partners. And so from your perspective on working on global justice issues, what do you think could be the main challenges or the main actually solutions to move forward to make this fight against impunity more effective?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It seems to me that if we're focusing on how we strengthen the fight against impunity through partnerships, the starting point would have to be that we have to take conflict prevention more seriously to prevent these atrocities happening in the first place, which was a point which the Minister of Justice alluded to. And, of course, conflict prevention and the importance of conflict prevention rests on three basic considerations. Economic, of course. It is much cheaper to prevent a conflict from occurring than trying to deal with it after the bloodletting has occurred. There's strategic reasons for it. It's far more complicated, far more difficult to try to fix a problem after you've had violence. And of course, the overriding reason, of course, is moral, which you're trying to save human life. My own commitment to conflict prevention is based on an early experience of its success. I mean, my first peacekeeping mission as a UN official was actually in this region when I arrived in Macedonia in the early 1990s, when the war was still raging. And Macedonia is a good example where the UN Security Council deployed in an unprecedented and unfollowed way the UN Preventive Deployment Force, which helped to prevent the war, which was then raging in Bosnia, from engulfing Macedonia, which of course lies on the vital crossroads of the Southern Balkans. And many people here would know that, because the Bosnian war was horrific and dreadful, but you usually have a general Balkan war when Macedonia is drawn in. And that, of course, the prospect of having two NATO members on opposite sides of a conflict was a nightmarish scenario. And it's for this reason that at the Hague Institute, I decided very early on that one of our major programmatic focuses would be conflict prevention, the two other being the rule of law and global governance. So the international community and all the actors, whether they're governments, whether they're regional organizations, international institutions such as the UN, the private sector, civil society, have to be engaged in this collective effort to make sure that we focus on how we strengthen fragile and conflict-affected states in the very areas where you have huge mass atrocities, human rights violations, which now have to be dealt with this unique constellation of courts and tribunals which we have in The Hague. My second observation would be that if you're trying to strengthen the fight against impunity, it is vitally important that we remember the past. This year, of course, we commemorate the 20 years of Srebrenica. And as I said, I was in this region when the genocide occurred in Srebrenica. So at the end of June and early July, at the Hague Institute for Global Justice, we brought together an unprecedented group of UN officials, politicians, military generals, and survivors from Srebrenica to reflect on what happened, the process which led to that catastrophe, and to draw lessons, both as a service to history and also as a way of helping future policy making. And we did it in partnership with the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington and the National Security Archives at George Washington University. And it was an extraordinary experience which culminated in a public panel on the 1st of July. And there are lots, of course, of lessons of Srebrenica. Clearly, of course, the lack of political will in the Security Council, pitchforking peacekeepers in the no man's land between peace enforcement and peacekeeping. All of those lessons we need to learn. And then just third, and finally, on the part of civil society and the important role which organizations like the Hague Institute and other civil society organizations can play, I think they can play an effort in rallying support for the ratification of the Rome Statute. I think civil society organizations can also help to make sure that within countries, these crimes are within domestic constitutions, can be prosecuted domestically. And of course, they have an important role to play in explaining the role of the ICC and other tribunals to help deal with misperceptions about their role. And think and do tanks like the Hague Institute can play a role in terms of coming up with good ideas. We work closely with the ICC, monitoring the work of justice institutions and trying to find ways to build their capacity. We have a convening role as well. And finally, of course, the kinds of symposia where you can help prosecutors and judges who are doing a very difficult job.
Thank you very much. And this is great because this introductory round has brought us already to the end of our hour, and it means we can start opening up to the audience. I think there are some microphones, so if you would like to ask a question or comment, then please introduce yourself and perhaps your organization or where you're from and which member of the panel you would like to reply to your question. Yes, please, go ahead. I happen to know this is a genocide expert, so he gets the floor immediately. Mr. Prevention himself.
We hear each other? Yeah. Thank you very much, Zoe. It's Mateusz Pezdirc. I'm from European Network for Investigation and Prosecution of Genocide, War Crimes, Crimes Against Humanity, based in The Hague, so your hometown. And now this is kind of my hometown, living the 5th year in The Hague. It's kind of being dual hometown. But the question would relate to the following. How could we persuade or convince decision makers to restart the discussions from the 90s, if I put it that way, as the minister started? Because in my work, what I experience is that we're competing with terrorism, organized crime, and other crime areas, and it's pretty hard to persuade decision makers to invest in their national efforts to invest in establishing a national war crimes unit, to secure proper resources, both human and financial. And usually they say, well, these are very, very complex cases, and well, we have ICC, so that's it. Why should we do more? But it's on the contrary. It's the state responsibility, the primary state responsibility is to investigate and prosecute these atrocity crimes, and ICC only kicks in when states fail to do so. And for example, when we look at Syria or other current ongoing hot potatoes, it's states that do have jurisdiction. Despite the fact that ICC doesn't have jurisdiction, all states around the world that have encompassed extraterritorial jurisdiction can investigate and prosecute perpetrators of these crimes that have occurred in Syria, but also in any other place in the world. And European states are front runners in this capacity to really work, and Netherlands should be complemented on this basis, to really do a fair trials and fair investigations throughout the world of atrocity crimes that have occurred when perpetrators are located in their territory. And true, it's on one side also Senegal has positive news, but let's be honest, the case of Hissène Habré would not be possible today. When Belgium changed its universal jurisdiction legislation that kicked in the ICJ decision and in that way made a pressure to the Senegal, that's no longer possible today. So that's still the heritage of an 90s positive spirit. My question would be, what would be your advice how to really persuade decision makers to invest more on this crime area? And in that way, if all the states would do so, that would definitely bring the international justice and fight against impunity quite several steps forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have to invite you to join the panel next time, because we've got some very interesting information there. Mr. Dieng, can I pass that question to you, and I'll ask the other panelists who want to come in.
Well, briefly, I would say that we have definitely today challenge. Take the ISIL, Daesh, take Boko Haram. It poses a serious, I would say, accountability challenges. And as you rightly pointed, the ICC is a court of last resort. And there is a possibility today which need to be, I would say, extensively used. That is for those members of ISIL or Boko Haram who are citizens of state parties to the ICC. I think those states should assume their responsibility, prosecute those, their own national, and that make it. And also the Security Council has also a responsibility for those coming from non-state parties to the Rome Treaty. And unfortunately, the Security Council is so far failing to really address that accountability issue regarding the crimes being committed in Syria, crime being committed by ISIL, and we need to put more pressure on the Council. That is why I cannot but fully support the initiative taken by my good friend, the Ambassador of Liechtenstein, and also the initiative which the Honorable Minister referred, the mutual legal assistance. There is a potential which is not being used so far. And at the end of the day, we have simply to recognize that universality of the Rome Treaty, of the ratification, is something which is extremely important, not only to bring justice to the victims of these atrocity crimes, but also to make it impossible for the perpetrators of those crimes to have any safe haven anywhere around the world. If Bashir, as we said earlier, was facing today difficulties in some countries, that is because those countries have ratified, despite the fact that we see the event in South Africa. Now, regarding the universal justice, you made reference to the case of Belgium. As I said earlier, there were some, even one of the Senegalese leaders didn't want to push the case, but finally it was done. It was done because also of the pressure from the civil society. There were no less than 120 African NGOs which were backing this initiative. And I think this has to continue. Unfortunately, we have seen Belgium, which was really, I would say, at the avant-garde of the universal jurisdiction, as you said, amending its own legislation. Why? We all remember that was under pressure from the then US administration, because there were NGOs which wanted to bring cases against those. So, which means when we are talking about derailing today the ICC, that's not only Africa. I mean, the ICC itself was being derailed from the beginning by the Bush administration. I remember meeting heads of state asking, what can we do? We have received an envoy from President Bush saying that if we accede to, if we don't make this reserve, Article 98, they will cut. I said, don't worry. You don't have to proceed. But it was easier to say. Finally, for those in West Africa, I said, look, try to have a regional arrangement and say, this is the regional position. That is to say that even when it comes to cooperation with the ICC, there are certainly states which want to cooperate, but which are under some kind of a threat, be it military, be it also acceding to some advantages. So that's why I think we need, as state parties to the ICC, to explore all those issues. Sometimes it's easier to criticize, for instance, a state X for not cooperating. But let's try to see what are really the real reasons behind that refusal. Is it simply because they don't want to participate in the fight against bringing an end to impunity? Or is it because of some other reason? So that's why I said partnership is, again, extremely important, because cooperation is key to the success of the ICC. And to conclude, I would simply say that we have also to realize the responsibility of the Security Council, where the Security Council is failing to simply acknowledge no less than 11 communications which have been sent to the Council by the prosecutor of the ICC regarding issues of non-cooperation with Libya, with Darfur. That situation not only affects the credibility of the Security Council itself, but also affect the ICC credibility. So that's why I said we need there also, when we talk about partnership, to see how we can further strengthen the participation, the contribution of the Security Council in the fight against these crimes. The Council stood firm at the end of the Balkan War, setting the ICTY, which made tremendous work. The Council repeated the same for Rwanda in 1994, and we have seen the result. But unfortunately, the selectivity of the Council is undermining definitely the international criminal justice system. And we have seen it these recent years, not only the ICC, but even some other tribunals have faced those difficulties.
Thank you very much. I know the President, the Minister, Dr. Williams, want to come in on this question as well, maybe you as well, Ambassador. And then we might already start running out of time. So if I can ask people to be brief, but let me start with you, Madam President.
Well, I would try to be very brief because many of the subjects have been already touched upon. But I thank you very much for this question that goes back to the beginning, that the International Criminal Court is just a part of a system. It cannot do all the work. It cannot address all atrocities. Some it cannot do it even legally because it's beyond our borders. But basically, the idea has always been that the primary responsibility continues to lie with states. And it is absolutely essential that states really take up upon themselves the responsibility, this primary responsibility to investigate and prosecute themselves. Now, the first thing to be sure that this can be done is to have the proper legal framework. And that's why we very much insist when states ratify the Rome Treaty is that they also need to implement legislation domestically to make sure that they can investigate and prosecute the same crimes. And this has happened already, and many states have also taken the opportunity to update their local implementation of other very important international humanitarian conventions. So one is to have the appropriate legal framework. The other one is the initiative, for instance, to provide an incentive for foster cooperation interstates, not necessarily with the court, but within themselves. And the Minister of Justice has here alluded to this idea of this treaty for mutual assistance for this type of crimes. The third one is to have the proper national capacity to investigate and prosecute. Some states do. Some states do not have this capacity, and even if they do, maybe they have it for ordinary crimes, but these are complex crimes, as you have said, that require sometimes something extra. Some of the crimes that were referred to the court were referred to our court because of the lack of capacity of the national systems. So building capacity at the national level is very important. Sometimes states want us to do it. The International Criminal Court, they say, well, you should help the state to build capacity to continue with the case. That we cannot do, but we are very much welcome any kind of national efforts to do that. I will stop here because I think my co-panelists want to also add other issues.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Mr. Minister.
Thank you. I'll also try to be brief, but basically I want to respond in two ways to Mateusz's question. One is very banal and very practical, and it is a responsibility of decision makers. First, of course, we need to pay the fees, the ICC, and the records of most of the countries is not the best in that area. Second, there are so many countries that ratify their own treaty. At the same time, there are only, 15 or something countries that have also signed up a memorandum with the court on the execution of sentences, on witness protection, and victim support units. Those are practical things that countries, especially countries that were in the like-minded group as Slovenia, was not to forget, and basically support the court through very practical measures like this. Of course, also required by the court to do perhaps some reforms, to work transparently, but generally not just criticizing it. Second is that countries like Slovenia, which was always a champion of the court and of their own statute, keeps that on the agenda on meetings like this. And that brings me to, you made a very good point, because today it is more opportune to speak about other issues. If you look at the development of international responses on other, you could see, first in the 90s, I was international criminal law, humanitarian law. Then came organized crime, and everybody rushed to organized crime. Then came corruption. Everybody rushed towards corruption. You could get funding for corruption. You get treaties in corruption. NGOs were working primarily on corruption. Then the big news, next big news, terrorism. Now you have terrorism. Whatever comes after, we don't know, but basically that fragments the resources. NGOs are sometimes looking also for their niche projects, etc. And even within the UN, that is my personal experience, there is much to be done to get synergies in this area. I'll give you a very practical example. I was a member of the subcommittee for the prevention of torture. Most of you know about that. You're visiting prisons. In every prison, in every country where there was gross violations of degrading and inhuman treatment, that was closely linked to gross and high-level systemic endemic corruption. However, we were sitting in Geneva and not speaking to the people responsible for UNCAC in Vienna. In the same organization. It was blasphemy also, almost to say, me as a member, that we need actually to, perhaps it's good to exchange more than just, some diplomatic visits and say how good we are. So those are issues that human rights people and law enforcement people, although this is a gross generalization, need to start speaking more together. Because at the end of the day, you don't see mass atrocities without dirty money, without high-level corruption, without, I mean, you look at African diamond smuggling, etc., then of course, I don't want to sound political, but at the end of the day, yes, you know, corporations being involved, etc. So when those issues will come together, and your work will not be seen also, I want to prevent crimes against humanity or work on investigation about crimes against humanity, but it's also tackling corruption, root causes of terrorism, poverty, you know, weak state, then we will be able to keep that on the agenda, not as special, you know, individual stars on the sky, but basically that we actually see that the sky is black and they need some light there. And that is a responsibility, I think, of governments, not to ride on the horse, which is the sexiest catchphrase, you know, of the decade, or and then forget about institutions for which we fought, and you know, because we have another fashionable idea. Although all are legitimate, please don't misunderstand me and misquote me, you know. But those problems usually have a similar route, and we need to go to that route, whatever we call it afterwards: crimes against humanity, anti-money laundering, corruption, or you know, or terrorism. Thank you.
A footnote about the UN. I should say that there is an improvement these days, because I mean,
a small one.
The special rapporteur, the human rights mechanism. I mean, we are cooperating very closely. Even the High Commissioner for Refugees, I mean, I even concluded a memorandum of cooperation, because at the end of the day, within the UN, I think we are really moving more towards really protection. In fact, I was saying, if there is a legacy Secretary General Ban Ki-moon would leave behind him, that might not be the climate change, but that would be on the right issues. And I think, take South Sudan, despite all the frustration, people were safe when the doors were open in December 2013, unlike when in Rwanda the doors were closed, leading to the killings of how many people. So I think there is an improvement, but still we need to continue to strengthen that cooperation between the various UN agencies.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to you, Ambassador Benevezen.
Okay.
Well, you asked a very concrete question. What do you tell a decision maker? I think what you tell a decision maker is, if you do this, you invest in your own investment. You have invested so much in international criminal justice, and now you have to make it work. You know, you cannot just create an institution and say, oh, there's this institution in The Hague, we're paying our annual membership, and that's it. That's how it's not going to work. So you invest in your own investment. Second is you invest in peace and security. You invest in stability. You know, these are the crimes that displace people. And, you know, now they're coming to Europe, but the fact is, you know, they're being displaced, you know, 80% of the people are displaced elsewhere. And they are fleeing atrocity crimes. And in the end, somebody is paying humanitarian assistance for them, one way or the other. And you can do the math yourself, which one costs you less, if that's the only thing that you have in mind. If there's other things you have in mind, you come to the same conclusion anyway. I don't share the notion that the 90s were so great for accountability and today is so awful. The 90s was a different time. You know, it's always easier to create an institution than to make it work. I talked to somebody this morning about landmines, and they asked, well, what happened to that Ottawa Treaty, by the way? So there was this big drive to abolish landmines. Of course, landmines still exist today, but we do work in circles and in cycles. And we are in a different cycle now, and what we're doing now is as important as what we did in the 90s, because otherwise what we did in the 90s is actually not worth much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Williams.
Just to follow up on that point, and the question touched on an important political issue, which is how do you convince and make the case to policymakers and politicians? It's a difficult issue because how do you, the time frame, whether it's for international justice or for conflict prevention, is a longer time frame, which is different from the political clock and the political time frame. whether it's 2 years, in this case of the states and the Congress, elections every 2 years, or 4 years for presidential or parliamentary elections, and finally 5 years. So the calculus of politics is very different from the calculus of trying to ensure the long-term development of international justice and, of course, conflict prevention when the results may not be immediate. So it's a huge political challenge. Now, I think there are three ways that can be helped. The first, of course, is the role of civil society organizations, particularly in democracies. And civil society organizations can help to put the pressure on politicians to make the right decisions. Second, we've not so far mentioned the critical role of the media. Part of the difficulty, of course, that we find, whether it's with the ICC or the institutions, is that the media have an important role in misperceptions about international justice. So having fair and balanced and informed reporting about international justice by the media, and having the media help to make the case to politicians can help to bring about the kinds of investments which are necessary. And then third, of course, the private sector. The private sector can have both a positive and a negative impact in these situations, even in fragile societies. But the private sector wants stability. They want to be able to do business. They understand the importance of the rule of law. And so if you can have the private sector channel that influence, which governments can then respond to, that can help them to make the investments for promoting the rule of law, without which nothing, politics, economics, business, is not possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilmers-Goldman.
Very, very quickly, I come at it from a much more practical perspective. Matthias, you have to make it easy for these states to get assistance from the international community. If you have a society coming out of conflict, they're going to have a whole lot of priorities that for them and for their people will seem like it's more important than looking at justice for what has happened. So if you can provide them with the assistance without a lot of the baggage that comes with the politics of the international community, you can have states reaching out to them and saying, hey, we can provide you with the expertise. The expertise can assist you. We can work with you to be able to help you to do the investigation and the prosecution. That's one way, one practical way of maybe just cutting across this process. You heard the president of the court say that states are actually coming to the court, and the court doesn't have that as its mandate and doesn't have that in its ability. But we, the states, do, and we're building mechanisms like ours to be able to provide that expertise to states. Thanks.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to give the last question or comment to the gentleman in the white shirt. Unless it's a very quick question and quick answer, then we can take a couple of more.
I have to first apologize to Slovenian organizers for asking for floor in every session, but my name is Antti Pentikäinen and I have 2 points. First of all, I think while we speak, we have to keep in mind the connection of prosecution and the peace mediation, and we do appreciate the annual dialogues we have with the chief prosecutor in the Amsterdam dialogue phase, but I think it has to be underlined. For example, in the case of Joseph Kony, I was part of the team that helped the recent rounds with him on negotiations, and the timing of ICC wasn't exactly helpful because there was a local solution provided that could have met also the legal requirements with the government of Uganda. But the second point is that where the system still fails is in the broader transitional justice framework and reconciliation. And I'm just saying that would your institutions have capacities to partner looking into the national assets on transitional justice, and also how religious communities and tribal communities with their traditional traditions can and could address justice and reconciliation. For example, in the case of South Sudan, it's been acknowledged that one of the key reasons for the renewal of the violence was that there was never a genuine reconciliation.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to ask the microphone for the lady here in the front, because you were holding up your hand and I didn't see you. We can actually take two more questions, and then I'm going to just ask the panelists as we do a final round, just you can pick up whichever question you like. First the lady here in the front with the glasses, and then the lady in the back.
Is the impact, the local impact of international courts. And my question really, I guess, is about this rhetoric of the fight against impunity. It's a terminology that sort of focuses us very much on the macro level, the institutional level. And my question is there a danger, I guess, in using this terminology that we lose sight of the victims, the people that we're doing justice for, what they want, what their needs are? And this then, I guess, links to what Mr. Vamos Goldman said about delivering credible accountability. I've done a lot of work with various victims in the former Yugoslavia, and often they're very dissatisfied, which again goes back to this point about the disconnect that Madam President mentioned between what courts can do and what victims expect them to do. But I guess the question I'm asking is, are we doing enough to deliver credible accountability, an accountability that actually means something to the people on the ground?
Right, thank you very much. And then the last comment from the floor will be yours.
Yes. First, I'd like to apologize for basically missing most of this panel for another appointment, but the debate that ensued sort of touched upon me as well. And I'd like to sort of go back to the first question that Mateusz started with and turn it around. Before I do, I'll just introduce myself. From the Office of the Prosecutor, International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So in a way, I'd be shooting myself in the foot to ask this question, but looking at it from the other side of the spectrum, within your institutions, on the high-level decision-making positions you are and have been in the past, and people you've contact with within these and other institutions, how much debate is there and how much effort is being put into, I think this has stopped working, into, right, into actually addressing the more effective, or like the lack of efficiency, or reducing perhaps, that would be the right word, efficiency of the management of these institutions themselves, the problems of the budget, the completion strategies that we're dealing with, that perhaps, I mean, I'm speaking now from quite a personal experience, believing that a lot of my work goes into dealing with completion strategy issues, including personal and other professional administration questions, and I can see this happening across the board, particularly at the criminal tribunals in The Hague that I'm a part of, and I can see a lot of energy is being wasted on that work is in some ways being diminished, and I would like to know how much these questions are being addressed rather than just being observed, and because I have a feeling that we're just observing that we're slowing down, that we can't do that much, that we're afraid for the budgets on the institutional level, on the professional, personal level as well of the employees, and so I think that's also another question that should be addressed apart from addressing the states themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have 3 very interesting questions from the audience and 7 minutes and 6 panelists to go. So doing the math, that would mean one minute each, and you each get to just choose which one you would like to address. And I know the time is very limited, but I do have very serious and strict instructions to stick to the time, because I do need to prepare the room here for the Western Balkans panel, always one of the more popular ones here. I'm just going to go down the line. I'm going to start on my left. Go ahead.
So I am, not surprisingly, I'm going to focus on the question from the lady in the front on whether our rhetoric is too much on the macro level. I totally agree. It is, and not only are we losing sight of the victims, I think we're also losing sight of the details that need to go into creating credible accountability. We're focusing very much on the politics of the situation as opposed to making sure that we're able to put together all of the elements that are needed to have credible accountability. I think that's something that is being recognized. I think that is becoming not just recognized, but being addressed. And I think the more we focus on it, the more we're going to be able to achieve credible accountability.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Venemezu.
I'll take the money question. The first thing I would say is international criminal justice is not expensive, and I think it's very important to say that. 110, 120 million euro a year is not a lot of money at all compared to what we're spending otherwise. Second, of course, it is serious money, and it has to be managed carefully, and we have to get the best for our money. So improving the judicial proceedings at the court is key. To have, trials conducted effectively and the resulting in satisfactory outcomes is key for the credibility of the court. Third, what you're going through in completion strategies, I think and hope that in the future will nobody have to go through. I think the ICTY, the ICTR model is something that will not be repeated, should not be repeated. That doesn't mean that these were bad courts. These were very important courts. But I hope the model for the future is to either have trials before the ICC or, very importantly, which is not happening enough, international investment in divisions within states, which means you make a lasting contribution to the state and the judiciary within that state, and that really is sustainable development.
Thank you very much. President Fernandez.
Thank you. Are we doing enough for victims? No, we are not. And the ICC, as I said, we have this new system for victims' participation and reparations that was intended to get closer to the victims, get closer to the affected communities, but that takes a lot of effort. We still have to find the right way of doing it because we have been implementing the system of the court, and we can see that we are far from what we expected we could do for victims. And one of the problems of our institutions of being an international court is that by definition you are very far away from them. So we even try to get physically closer to them. But for instance, today we are starting a new trial at the court, Bosco Taganda, and we were hoping that we would start at least the proceedings in Bunia, where the affected communities are, but for a number of security and logistical reasons we could not. But we thought that even that really getting closer physically to them would help. But indeed, this is a key factor to enhance the credibility of our institution. And 1 second on management, we take a lot of time and effort in trying to improve the management of the institution and reform the criminal proceedings. We cannot have credible justice unless we have good governance and improve the output, as I said at the beginning.
Right, thank you very much. I just realized that Minister Klemenčić is not a politician because he wanted to yield his time. The politicians never do that, especially when they get a pick of their questions. So I'm going to let you have the last word, actually. So you think about your 1 minute, you can say anything you like. Mr. Dieng.
Well, just to...
Microphone, please.
Just to say that the question raised by the colleague from ICTY, I cannot but fully agree and share your concern. I have been with ICTR for almost 12 years. In fact, I initiated at that time the first meeting to address the issue of the legacy, which ended with the establishment of the residual mechanism, as you may know. But I am really frustrated, and I think this tribunal have lasted too long. Be the ICTY, I mean, more than 20 years down the road. They achieved a lot in terms, but I think if we had to re-establish this type of tribunals, I would not be that supportive. Hopefully we have the ICC now. We don't need these ad hoc tribunals any longer. But I think time has come really, and unfortunately the UN did not really, in terms of, I mean, the UN was not prepared, first of all, to run a tribunal, a criminal tribunal. It was not, it's so difficult. But we have to admit it, but hopefully you have almost come to the end of the process, almost. But it's time really to close this tribunal. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much. Dr. Williams.
I'd like to address the first question about transitional justice and truth and reconciliation. Of course, one of the great advances we've seen in the past 15, 20 years, of course, is accountability and holding those who commit horrendous crimes accountable. But criminal accountability is only one element, albeit a very important element, in getting societies to heal and to help prevent the renewal of conflict. And my great concern is that in many parts of the world, including in this region, which is very close to my heart, as I said, where I served and began my UN career, you've never had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And getting people who've been engaged in awful atrocities on different sides, as was the case in South Africa, to talk openly about what has happened, to try to heal societies. Because if that is not done, one always runs the risk of things being buried and almost suddenly reappearing. So that would be my point. And then also, another related element in helping societies heal is the importance of education, which is why at the Hague Institute, one of our key projects is looking at the role of education and the prevention of mass atrocities and conflict prevention. And it's of tremendous concern that in Bosnia, now, this is my first visit after 15 years to this region, and you've had a whole generation of young people who were born after the war, who have been educated in segregated schools, who have seen, look at the other, and have never sat side by side in a classroom. And they one day will wield powers and will wield political power. It is something one has to think about, and the important role of education. And may I just end with the words with Maya Angelou, the great American poet who passed away recently. And she said in a poem which she read at the inauguration of President Clinton, the first President Clinton, she said, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again.
Thank you very much. How are you going to top Maya Angelou?
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to say. How to beat that?
Can I just say, because you are here as a representative of the government, it is really to the credit of the government of Slovenia that they managed to put together this Bled Strategic Forum every year, and that questions such as these, which are not maybe the most popular, sexy, hot topics, do get a panel of this caliber. And I think that's really a compliment to the government. So if you could pass it on to the Prime Minister. That, and I have a feeling that as long as you're going to be Justice Minister, these kind of topics will remain on the agenda.
Yeah, that's true.
Good. Very good. Then can I take the time to thank you, the audience, but mostly to thank these panelists and all the wonderful and inspirational stories and suggestions and ideas we've heard, and especially the motivation from each, from their own responsibilities and organizations, to try to move this forward. And to invite you all back to this hall at 4 o'clock for the Western Balkans panel, which I'm sure will be very interesting as well, and to go and have a coffee now. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.